My name is David Azevedo. I'm an Associate State Director at AARP's California State Office. Our team works hard to deliver results for our over 3.3 million members in the Golden State. And we work on important quality of life issues in healthcare, retirement security, and age-friendly communities. Our California Climate Chats event series thus far has tackled two elemental and foundational parts of life. Our first Climate Chats focused on air quality and how increasingly hazardous wildfire smoke poses a significant health threat to everyone, not just those with chronic lung and heart conditions. Our second Climate Chats discussed extreme heat and how, as we age, we become more vulnerable to the longer, hotter summers we're experiencing. Today, we're discussing another integral part of life, water. According to the Public Policy Institute of California, climate change is making the Golden State's droughts more intense. The past 2 decades have been exceptionally warm and dry, and included the hottest drought from 2012 to 2016 in California history. According to UCLA scientists, we may actually be in a mega drought, that the last 22 years have been the driest years California has experienced since the late 1500s. Compounding California's problems is a severe drought affecting not just our state, but every other state west of the Rocky Mountains. The Colorado River Basin, which is the most significant source of water for California, Colorado, Arizona, Nevada, and New Mexico, is facing its lowest levels in recorded history. Drought is not an uncommon occurrence in California and the West, but the science and evidence are clear. The rise of our planet's average temperatures, driven by human-generated emissions of heat-trapping greenhouse gases, sets off a domino effect in the environment that makes droughts worse. Water evaporates more quickly at higher temperatures, which results in drier soils and drier plants and foliage. Warming also diminishes snowfall, which is a crucial source of fresh water for filling rivers like the Colorado and reservoirs here in California. So, what does drought mean for our day-to-day life? Water underpins every aspect of our lives, from keeping our bodies healthy and hydrated, to coming out of our faucets in our showers and our taps, to growing our fruits and vegetables and employing farm workers and farmers, which is a significant part of our industry here in California. AARP has a 60-year history of standing up for generations of older adults and their quality of life. Drought is a clear and present danger to that quality of life for older adults now and in the future. That's why we're here today, to talk about how we got to this point, where we're headed if we don't take action, and what each of us can do and together in our communities to prepare for worsening conditions in California and learn how it affects our health and well-being as we age. Thank you again for joining us. And now, before I introduce my co-moderator, please make sure that you are on mute. Again, we're living in our Zoom lives these days. So again, make sure to put yourselves on mute for the rest of this call. But I'm going to introduce my co-moderator today, Victor Griego, who is executive council member here with AARP California and volunteer. So Victor, go ahead and introduce yourself. And Victor, you may be on mute. We may have lost Victor, unfortunately. We are having some technical difficulties. So I will go ahead and work on the back end here with my colleague, Shay, who's also with AARP, to get him back on the line. But we'll go ahead and just get started then with our biography introductions to our two panelists. So our first panelist is Mayor Ray Leone. He is the mayor of the town of Huron, California. He was born in Fresno and raised in the Huron area and has been organizing in the Central Valley for the past 20 years. He is the founder and executive director of the San Joaquin Valley Latino Environmental Advancement and Policy Project, known by its acronym as Valley LEAP. And he's also the founder of the San Joaquin Valley Regional Green Jobs Coalition, as well as the co-founder of the Central Valley Air Quality Coalition. Welcome, Mayor Leone. And we also have with us Joone Lopez, who is the general manager of the Moulton Niguel Water District, which provides water, wastewater, and recycled water services to 6 cities in South Orange County. Before joining Moulton Niguel, she served as the general manager of Calaveras County Water District, located in Northern California. Joone's prior experience includes working for Apple Valley Ranchos Water Company as its assistant general manager and serving as the deputy general manager of the Central Basin Municipal Water District. So we'll go ahead and get Joone on here. We're very excited to have her on. We know that she is joining us from Denver today, so I wanted to make sure we spotlight her here. Welcome, Joone. How is Denver treating you today?
Hi, David. Hello, everyone. It's so great to be with you virtually. Yeah, I'm here in Denver for work, and so I'm just so thankful to be invited to speak with everyone at AARP. So I'm having a great day. How are you?
Doing great. It's great to have everybody join us today for this great conversation. So we'll go ahead and just start with you because we are having, again, unfortunately, some technical difficulties with our other panelists today. But we're just so excited to have you on, given that you play an instrumental role in getting water to our taps. You're the general manager of a water district serving 6 communities in Orange County. Before we get to that, could you give us a general overview of what exactly a water district does and what's it like to lead one?
Sure. So the water district, you all get water at your homes and business. We also make sure we take care of all your wastewater needs. So our job, as you all know, is to make sure that the water keeps flowing through your tap. And when you flush your toilet, that everything goes where it's supposed to go. But behind the scenes, there's a lot more. And I think I'll talk to you a little bit about that to give you an idea of what a water district does, and especially in my role. So behind the scenes, we first have to make sure that there's enough water supply for your needs. And in Southern California, especially, we rely heavily on imported water from Northern California and Colorado River. So we have these communities that we serve, but for many agencies, these waters come from outside of our service area. So we have to make sure that we secure enough for our community. And it's quite competitive. You can imagine all the different needs throughout the state of California. And as David so articulately stated about the Colorado River, there are these basin states that also rely on Colorado. So we always have to negotiate and try to see how much water we can secure for our respective communities. Ooh, I think I hear some feedback.
Yeah, there's some, please place yourselves on mute.
Yes. I know this is such a virtual norm now. We've all got to have a little sense of humor. It's all going to be okay.
Exactly, all good.
And so when we have to compete for these supplies, it requires a lot of work with our legislators, both at the state and the federal level. It also requires a lot of negotiation with different interest groups, the non-government organizations, environmental groups, other communities, and other stakeholders, even outside of the state of California. So there's a lot that goes into these kinds of negotiation, and it can be quite contentious. Some of you may have heard of this old adage, whiskey's for drinking and water is for fighting. And yes, we have a very illustrious history of a lot of contention because everyone needs water. It's just something that we can't live without. So you can imagine the amount of emotions that run through when we talk about water. So we have to first make sure we have enough water supply. We also have to make sure that we have the infrastructure, the pipes, all these infrastructures that go into making sure that you get water no matter what. And I think 2020 was such a great example of that, as people were staying home and washing your hands, need for water was so imperative. But as a water agency, we have to make sure that no matter what's going on in the world, we have to get that water to your home. Now, when you look at the infrastructure, let's compare that to like roads and transportation. You see it all the time when you drive over that bumpy road or that pothole. You're like, gosh, these road needs fixing. Those are very visible and very tactical kinds of reminders to all of us about the importance and the value of these infrastructure. What's interesting about water and wastewater is that majority of our infrastructure is out of sight. It's underground. And even if it's above ground, it's sort of covered to look like a house or a tree, so it doesn't stand out and become an eyesore in the community. So out of sight, out of mind. And that's a problem because so much of our infrastructure is very old, beyond 50, 60 years in many of these communities. And we can't take everything and replace them because it's cost prohibitive. Also, because how long these systems have been in place, Many agencies don't even know where their infrastructures are located and be able to hand that information down generation to generation. And when you look at the water composition in the state of California, there's almost 3,000 water providers. So you can imagine the fragmentation of the system that is supposed to be connected, because our pipes don't end within our boundaries. It's connected in a very wide network. So it's a very interesting challenge that we have to manage, is that we are systems connected to other systems. And if some of those systems are kind of the weak link where they have problems, it does affect our community. So that's why we're so interconnected in our relationships. So we have to, as water agencies, really manage that, working regionally, statewide, and federally. The other thing that we do is we make sure that our customer needs are met, and making sure that your questions are answered, because we rely on the rates that our customers invest. So we need to make sure that we develop that relationship with our communities and our customers. So there's a lot of engagement, there's a lot of communication, there's a lot of outreach. And typically for years, when I started in the water industry a while back, it was always about flying under the radar, utility kind of out of sight. But I think more and more it's important that we become into the spotlight. So you see who we are, and you can share in our challenges and solutions. And that's certainly from Moulton Niguel. That's how we look at the service that we provide. So what's it like to be the general manager of a water agency? I think it's great. I always encourage everyone to do it, because not one day, no 2 days are the same. Every day it's something different, and it's what you make of it. Unlike some of others in the industry, I really love the partnership. I love the people that we get to interact with. And I always like to say, we're not just in the water business, we are in the people business, because especially with the challenges that we're facing, whether it's a drought or pandemic or other natural events, we can't do it without you. We can't do it without the customers. And that's why I'm so thankful for this opportunity, because AARP, it's a great group. You're a powerhouse. And so if we can get you as our partners, addressing all these kinds of challenges, the better we will be.
Well, thank you so much for that. And thank you for calling us a powerhouse. We are only a powerhouse because of our 3.3 million members here in California and 38 million members across the country. So again, those are all the folks that are on this call today. So just really excited to have you in conversation with all of us. So I'm sure we all have questions that we'll get to later. And if you have some questions, as a reminder, please make sure to use the chat feature on the Zoom on the right side. You'll see some of the features that you can do there to make sure to send chats to everyone. That's where we're going to take our questions later in the call. So I'd like to see if we have got our fearless co-moderator with us, Victor Griego. Victor, are you able to join us today?
I can hear. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. We're so glad to have you on. I know you're joining by phone, so we can't see you. But Victor, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, David. And thanks for Joone's brief presentation. We're going to hear a lot from her. So my name is Victor Griego, as David mentioned earlier, and I'm an executive council member for AARP California. And I had joined the organization as a council member for one reason, and that is to make sure that folks who are over 50 have a seat at the table and are heard in terms of what their needs are, but more importantly, so they can contribute to the great state of California. I think all Californians have a responsibility to make sure that our lives are healthy, that we could contribute in a way that takes care of not only our generation, but generations to come. And the work that AARP certainly affords people like myself to do that, others to do that. And I know we've historically thought of AARP of people over 70 or 80 years old, but as you all know, you get a letter from AARP at the age of 50. So we encourage anyone and all to join the organization. And as you can see, I think there's a TikTok video talking about anyone can join the organization. We certainly target 50 and above, but if you're 25 or 30, whatever, you're more than welcome to join the organization, because we are here for all of California. So I'm excited to be a part of AARP, and I'm also excited to share the work that I do through water education for Latino leaders, and the work that we do through our California around educating local Latino leaders on water policy and educating and training them so that they could be prepared to work in their communities around the challenges that Joone mentioned earlier. And I appreciate the fact that she said that folks in the water district that do the day-to-day work to provide water to communities are not in the water business, they're in the people business. So we can talk about the pipes and the processes to deliver water, but if people are not aware of the challenges of water, then the professionals like Joone and others can do all they want to make sure that the water is delivered daily. But if everyday folks living in neighborhoods and homes and small businesses and large businesses, if they don't appreciate the challenges, then the water districts are going to have an extremely difficult time managing the water that goes to homes and businesses in California. So the work that AARP is doing and other organizations who have webinars to educate folks about the water challenges is really key to a sustainable strategy in California. And so the work that AARP is doing, the work that Water Education for Latino Leaders are doing to educate people on the water challenges is a big, big part of the solution. So I'm excited today and look forward to the conversation and the questions that are coming up. And I'm not sure, David, I think the mayor is sick. I just got a text from Paul. Are you aware of that?
Yes, unfortunately, I just got that note. So unfortunately, we're unable to hear from the mayor of Huron today due to him being out sick. So really sorry to hear that. But we're just so lucky to have both, of course, Joone and hearing from her expertise with the water district, but also from Victor, as he kind of alluded to, right? So Victor has been just so instrumental. And this is where I think we'll want to direct some of the questions that we had for the mayor to you, Victor, if you don't mind. Just given your work with WELL. So, you know, and just as a quick briefing, so Victor is probably too humble to have said this at first, but he's on our executive council here with AARP California, and we're just very indebted to have him. He's serving as a volunteer member of this special council of all volunteers that really help AARP address these issues and look at these issues like water management. So so we'll actually, Victor, if you don't mind, you know, we were going to have the mayor of Huron on, but you do have this expertise in communities like Huron, in which the mayor, Ray Leone, is mayor of in the Central Valley. But could you maybe just share from your experience the question that we had for him, which is how is the drought affecting communities in the Central Valley? What are economic and social effects that these communities are experiencing due to drought and water restrictions?
Sure. You know, we at Water Education for Latino Leaders, we have a constituency of local elected officials in the Central Valley, in the Coachella Valley. And as we all know, those communities are much different than communities on the coast or urban communities like Los Angeles, Orange County, San Diego, et cetera. So when drought hits those communities, it's a lot different than urban communities. Many of these towns, like Huron or San Joaquin, Fowler, et cetera, they're smaller towns. They're small farming towns, and traditionally, the water infrastructure that was created there was created for farming. Most people lived off of wells on their property, and so they didn't really rely on major water agencies like Joone's or LADWP or some of these bigger, larger urban water districts that many of us are familiar with. So they're affected much different than urban communities. So I know the mayor has to balance what the industry in his community, which is farming and agriculture, with the needs of local residents and their access to clean and affordable water versus the agricultural needs of the farming and agricultural community. So when the drought hits those type of communities, it's a lot different than, let's say, Southern California. As a matter of fact, I've read in the last year or so that Southern California, because of the good work of Metropolitan Water District and their reservoir systems, are in a much better position to provide water in the drought seasons for the last year and probably for the next couple of years than communities like Huron. So that's the irony that here in Southern California, where we import most of our water, in crises like this, we are in a better situation than the Central Valley and towns like Huron. So I think that's something that as we continue with this conversation, we'll keep in mind.
So that's a really great segue, because I wanted to ask Joone, in her position as general manager of the Moulton Niguel Water District in Orange County, if you could talk with us, Joone, about the state of water, if we can call it that, in California. How much do we have? How much do we have remaining if drought conditions continue? What tier of restrictions are we currently at with the state level? And are there parts of California, and Victor alluded a bit to this, that are worse off than others?
Yeah, and I definitely want to get into some of the things that Victor talked about. By the way, Victor's amazing, known him for years. So he's the one that told me about being on this. So I'm a big fan. When you look at the water system itself, I start to talk about over 3,000 water providers. And you're looking at all sizes and shape, from a large agency to mutual water system that really serve just a handful of residents in a particular neighborhood. And you might say, well, why is it that way? When you look at the power side, you have sort of the major players like SDG&E, Edison, PG&E, and maybe a couple others. But compared to power, we have so many water providers. And that's because of how California was developed. The farmers, the ranchers, the land development. So everyone just kind of created their own camps and formed together to provide these kinds of water service. That's why it's very fragmented. So that presents a lot of institutional and political challenge in being able to manage this resource in a very comprehensive statewide way that makes sense for everyone. And there is enough water in the state of California to meet all of the state's need. Not many people realize that. But where the water is not where the needs are. So that disconnect of the source and the need presents a lot of problem, because when you have all these political and institutional barriers, it prevents the free flowing of water from where it needs to go and serve the people that truly need it. On top of that, you have these 19th century laws and rules and policies that are governing water today in our modern times that really are inconsistent. It worked back then, but it doesn't really work now. As an example, water rights. Water rights are like, you cannot touch someone's water rights. Like, that is just sacrilegious. However, there are a lot of communities, like in Calaveras, where I used to work. It's a very rural part of Northern California. We had enough water. We had more water than we needed, but we had all these water rights, but we were the 19th most distressed state county in the country, the 19th most economically distressed, because we had this resource, but we didn't need it. So we're just sitting on basically this gold, as opposed to if we were to wheel it and transfer it to other areas, then we could realize the financial benefit. So there's a lot of ways to get around this, but it takes time. And not to mention some of the regulatory constraints. It takes a long time to bring projects to fruition for really good reasons, though. Environmental concerns, the impact to the quality of life of people living in a community if you have to have a big construction project. These are all valid reasons of why things take a long time. And because of this, it takes time when the need is increasing today, presents a very real challenge. And on top of all this that went on, we saw in 2020 a scenario that none of us expected. We never thought the pandemic would hit. It was unprecedented time for all of us. On top of that, natural events such as wildfire, record-setting wildfires, and the social unrest that really kept some of our employees from being able to come into work because they live in areas outside of where we serve. And also having these disturbances causes a lot of situation where safety concerns, where just the emotions of people, these are all part of the things that we have to contend with. So I know this sounds a little pessimistic, but I want to paint a realistic picture of water in California, because if we can realize where we are and where we need to be, and if we could be very honest and vulnerable about it, then I think we stand to move forward. If we just sit back and say, it's worked for all these times, let's just keep our fingers crossed, and I think we're doing a good job, then we're not being truthful to ourselves, and we will be caught with a great surprise. Because just to give you one reference point, If there was a major earthquake event in the state of California, which we all know is coming, it's a matter of time, say anything north of 6.2, 6.5, we are going to be in a world of hurt in the water industry for the communities that we serve, because the infrastructure is connected, but not all infrastructure is integrated. And what that means is I have my system that's connected to my neighboring system, but we don't work on these systems together. So we can't have this kind of the mutual aid of planning and responding the way that we should if a major disaster hit. The other is the Delta, which is the artery of water source in California. The Delta is very fragile. The sea level rising coupled with a major seismic event, the levees that have worked is still very, very fragile. There are communities there. And I know you all heard about the tunnel, no tunnel. Forget the tunnel for a second. It's really about the fragility of the Delta itself. So if there was a major earthquake, you're going to have intrusion of seawater into this artery. And what that's going to do is it's going to affect everybody in California, all the population, trillions in economic impact. So when you look at the magnitude of what we are facing, we should be very concerned. Not that we should crawl away and give up, but we need to be much more fortified and united in the way that we handle these situations. And it's not just, I tell my colleagues, not just the water agency's job. It's not just ours. We have to reach out to other community. We have to reach out to other sectors to say, we have a real crisis here. We have a problem. Can you help us? And link arms together to find these kinds of solutions, to advocate for the needs. Because as Victor mentioned, there are parts of state, even in Southern California, where people do not have access to safe and reliable drinking water. Over 1 million Californians in this day and age do not have access to drinking water. And part of that is a lack of infrastructure. Part of that is just the contamination of their water source. And you tell some of these communities, especially the communities that are more disadvantaged and they don't have the financial wherewithal to upgrade their systems. And you tell these customers when when the water comes out of your faucet and if it's yellow and odorous, it's okay, it's still safe to drink. Well, that doesn't work because the infrastructure within their homes and their apartments is also aged. And that affects how people look at water. It affects the safety, it affects our health. And in the broader scale of things, water is integrated to everything, whether it's a homeless issue, whether it's a development, housing, environmental, public health and safety. Water is part of all these challenges and issues, but it's also a great way to identify those opportunities. So for me personally, I actually like crisis because I do think it moves us faster and better to do what needs to get done, just because, some of the best ideas and inventions are from necessity. And I think the more we can understand the problems that we have, and we should not feel badly saying that we have a problem if we're truly looking for those kinds of solutions.
That's really helpful context, Joone, and especially on the broader infrastructure piece too, because we really take for granted, right, in California, how much infrastructure has been built over the decades. That's really decades old, and as you mentioned earlier, even in some cases centuries old. I'll never forget. I was biking in Los Angeles and just heard this boom at one point. This was several years ago, and it was a water main that had burst in West Los Angeles. And later in the news articles, it was saying, and it flooded everywhere, of course, but it was saying that it was 110 years old, and that they completely had forgotten, like you had alluded to earlier, they had forgotten about it. They didn't even know that this type of pipe still existed and that they hadn't been able to maintain it. And that's in a major city, right? That's not, in other parts of California. So that's just makes me think of, again, we take it so much for granted that so much work has been done, so much infrastructure dollars have been spent over the decades to essentially get us to this place of we're not thinking about it every time we turn on the tap. It just comes, right? And it's a testament, I think, to the great work and ingenuity of people like yourself, Joone, and our ancestors. So, with that, actually, we wanted to turn to kind of those solutions, right? What are the solutions out there? And this, I think, Victor, would be a great place for us to tap into your experience and knowledge working at WELL and with communities like Huron. what are communities doing to address the drought at the very local level? Joone was talking a little bit about the challenges of the major kind of state challenges, but what are some of the solutions that city governments, businesses, families, and individuals to deal with the challenges of drought?
Can you hear me now, David?
We can, yes.
Okay, great. Well, let's take it piece by piece, as you mentioned. I think individuals at home are probably the target for many of the water agencies and government entities to conserve and use less water. So obviously, whenever there's a drought, as Joone said, there's a crisis, and we can learn from that, and we come up with new solutions to deal with the crisis. So conservation certainly is a major emphasis for consumers. They're asked to use less water, obviously, in the showers and cleaning, et cetera, using less water in their gardens and, grass. Of course, we want to continue to support our trees because it provides so much, shade for us and takes in the carbon monoxide, et cetera. But the grass is a big problem for a lot of urban areas, and there's a lot of programs to get rid of grass. So I think homeowners and renters, et cetera, there's a big education component to conserve water. Secondly, to recycle, right? I mean, talk about rain barrels, et cetera. There's ways where people can recycle their water, and there's a lot of science and technology that is being produced because of the crisis to recycle the precious resource of water. And of course, you see that with wastewater, you see that with runoff, with stormwater, where not only the individual's homes can recycle that water, but government agencies are now doing much more around recycling wastewater, stormwater, et cetera. So recycling becomes a major strategy. So those are some of the things that individuals and governments could do around a drought and reducing the use of water. Then industries, of course, major industries, whether it's golf courses, whether it's the farming or agriculture, the movie industry, transportation industry, the energy community, all these industries, many times we have no idea how much water they're using. And so whatever that amount is and how they use it, they need to be looking at similar strategies that consumers have looked at. So they have to look at how do they reduce their use of water? What are the new technologies and science and methods that could have industry use less water to continue to produce their product? And then, of course, they need to look at recycling as well, and the technology that the recycling and reduction strategies can provide those industries. So specifically, of course, in the communities like Huron, where you have agriculture as probably 60% of the industry in the area, the new way of farming, the new way of producing crops, the new way for vegetables and fruits to be produced and processed, the technology that allows them to continue providing the product, but doing it with less water. And a good example of reducing, there's been studies and articles about LA and Palm Springs, Las Vegas, two cities, in warm climates, Las Vegas even more so than Los Angeles. But those two regions have increased populations without increasing water use, which is amazing if you think about it. Population growth, but using less water. So I think we can learn from that. So how does that happen? How do you have an extra 100,000, an extra million people, et cetera, in a particular region and use less water? Well, that's a testament to the consumer understanding how they have to use less water, and the industries using the science and technology to create new systems of using less water.
So I'm glad that you're bringing up the science and technology pieces, because we are getting some. I'm gonna take a couple great questions from the chat, even though I said audience Q&As at the end, just because we're on this subject and I want to make sure we get to them. So we have a couple folks in the chat that are asking, things, for example, desalination, right? We also have things like, the state now has water meters, right? Basically, I think that's now become the mandate that every dwelling has to have water meters, or most do, especially new ones. So in terms of the place of technology, and this we'll start with Joone and then go back to Victor, I think, but what are some technologies that interest you that might help us to continue conserving water? And even things, I really think that the two things that are on people's mind is the desalination question. I mean, obviously that's a huge cost to our state, but we are in a very rich state, the richest in the country. So that could be a use of resources. There's also potentially federal dollars coming in for infrastructure. So that might be feasible now when it couldn't have earlier. But also toilet to tap is worth mentioning too, even though I think that is happening to some extent with non-potable water, so non-drinking water, right? But that would be something, Jude, just to hear from you with your being in the industry, talking a little bit about the toilet to tap and maybe selling it to us a little bit, putting our fears aside, because I know that is a successful technology in many parts of the world. So we'll start with toilet to tap and desalination, and we'll take it from there.
Well, in California, I mentioned earlier, there's enough water for all the needs. There's enough money to take care of all the problems. And there's enough ideas and brilliance and technology innovation, all of that to take care of all the problems. What's lacking is the human will, the political will. That's the biggest problem when it comes to water. That's my opinion. Somebody else could feel differently, but that's certainly what I've seen. So yes, desalination, people ask me about that a lot. We got all this water in the ocean. What are we doing with it? Well, a couple of things though. In entire country, there's really one major desalination plant that's in operation, and that's in San Diego, Carlsbad. And that was a public-private partnership between the San Diego County Water Authority and all its members, and Poseidon, which is sort of this private entity that's been trying to launch this. So that is up and running. They're also trying to do Poseidon, a plant in Orange County, in the city of Huntington Beach. Now, a couple of things about desalination. It is part of our overall supply portfolio, but it has to be also looked at with an analysis of impact to the environment, the impact of cost, impact of feasibility, because to do a project, you have to go through many hurdles. These desal projects have been around and been talked about for decades. It takes a lot because in order to get the right permit, right, to get the approvals, the environmental, all these regulatory approvals, it takes time. And not to mention the public reaction to these kinds of projects, because you could have a great project, but the vocal opposition can also tank a deal like that. And desalination makes sense, but it depends where you are and what needs you're providing. It's not a silver bullet. When it comes to water, there is no single silver bullet, because you have to think about the cost, who's going to pay for that cost? Where is that water going? Does it go to the people that are paying for it? What is the environmental impact? We rely on the ocean for our oxygen. Over 70% of our atmospheric oxygen comes from the ocean, and there is an impact. Now, we can all disagree about the level of impact, but we have to evaluate all of this. And when you talk about direct potable reuse, is what we like to call toilet to tap, was not a good experience for us. The way that I like to think about it, which is actually what it is, every drop of water that we encounter in our lives has been reused. There is no new water. It's the whole water cycle that we learn in school. Mother Nature does a great job of cleaning the water, no matter where it's coming from, so that we could reuse it, drink it again, use it again for all of our needs. So this is part of the natural cycle. What technology has allowed us to do is to increase the pace in which that process occurs in nature. And the science is there, and it's been proven, in Texas, they do direct potable reuse. Other parts of the country does direct potable reuse. In ships, they do desalination. So these are kinds of the ways that we've seen that the technology works to be able to take whatever source of water and make it to the level that we can drink it. But again, it's the perception. It's the human part that keeps us from this, because, oh, the idea of this just went through, it's one thing what I don't see in the mother nature in the process, but now that I see that this is coming from, it's a reaction, it's emotional, it's a perception. And we as industry professionals have to do a better job of explaining ourselves, of telling the story. I think we always get so fixated on, well, of course this makes sense, this is fact, this is science, but we forget the importance of compelling you, the importance of you having to believe in us. And how can we do that until we establish trust? And I think that's a big part, is that there is a lack of trust, I think, at all different levels. And I don't think that's getting any better soon. So that's why we have to be very conscientious and intentional about how we tackle these kinds of problems. And Victor laid out some really great solutions that have helped us and will continue to help us. For me, just to kind of speak a little bit more broadly about what it's going to take, I think there's three things. I think it's going to take partnerships, pressure, and participation. Because as I mentioned, there is technology there, but as a water industry, we don't embrace it right away. I heard a very interesting factoid, which is water industry is the second slowest adopter of innovation and technology. Second slowest sector. You might be saying, well, who's the number one slowest? Hunting. So we're number two after hunting. That's why we got a lot of room to catch up. And we have to look at really data, because in water, how can we manage something that we can't measure? Do we really know how much needs we have in our community? I hate to tell you this, but many communities, we don't. Do we know how much water we need because we know the demands? Not really. Do we know what kind of infrastructure and project to build so we don't have stranded assets and capacity? So we're not overbuilding, which is over costing the ratepayers? Not really. So we started an effort, our agency with other agencies 7 years ago, to really bring better data to inform water decision-making and policies. But the reason I say those 3P is partnerships. We have to partner with people that are not like us, other industry. I think the insurance industry, AARP, I've had great luck in working with people that are not your typical partners in water, but you have to open the doors. We've worked with people like Netflix, the movie people, Facebook, academic institution, community-based organization, all these different stakeholders to bring bright ideas together. Because when it comes to solving problems, you can't do it alone, especially when the problem is really gigantic. So partnership, I think, is really important, having a very diverse, unconventional partnership. I want to put an emphasis on that. The second is pressure. I think sometimes as a utility, because out of sight, out of mind, we need to feel that social pressure. We saw in 2020 what that pressure can do. It can be quite groundbreaking. And it's a type of crisis to where the public is holding our industry accountable. Because when was the last time people really pay attention to water? You talk about the economy, you talk about COVID, but without water, those things are impacted. So we have to make water very visible, and you have to force us to be visible. You have to ask us the tough question. You have to demand answers. You have to put the pressure on us so that we can rise to the occasion, or for those who don't, can leave, right? It's sort of without feeling the heat. Will we rise as quickly as possible? And there are some people in the industry that don't like me talking about stuff like that, but I do believe that we all need a little bit of nudge. And the participation, again, this is where you all come in. There is room for everyone in the water industry, regardless of your experience, regardless of your background. We actually need that. We need those perspectives and experience and knowledge and expertise to figure out how we look at solutions, because I may be looking at one thing, but I don't know what I don't know. But you can help me learn something new. You can challenge me to think about it in a different way. And so this idea of participation is really critical, because without people taking on water as their own issue, I mean, Victor talked about all these conservation demand management effort in our community, our customers, I can't do it without them. They are my most valuable partners. When mandates come out about water restrictions, I have to rely on my customers to do the right thing. I have to give them the tools. I have to give them the information. I have to communicate with them. And so for us, that partnership with our customers, getting their participation has been very successful. And I think it is going to be even more critical as we go forward. And so for our agency, went from sort of customer service mindset, giving you what you want, what you need, to customer engagement, which is to really understand you and work with you to better anticipate your needs so that we can plan. But now the next phase is the customer experience. It's not enough that you participate. I want you to feel excited about your participation. I want you to feel that we are a good partner in your community and in your life, because we do have impact to the quality of your life. And that's the evolution of what we need to do, in my opinion, so that we can truly be better positioned than where we are today.
Joone, that's fantastic. I especially really relate to the kind of call for us to be water activists. Again, this is something that we take for granted, but it of course is instrumental to our way of life. And it also makes me think too of, and we've talked a little bit about this throughout the conversation, so I'm glad that we baked it into the conversation, but just to put a special spotlight on it before we end our call. But really, we can't talk about water and the drought without also talking about equity, and particularly the inequitable effects that the drought is already having on certain communities of California. Joone, I think you mentioned that 1 million Californians don't have access to clean drinking water or wastewater. I'll never forget, I was about 10 years ago with a farm working community in the Bakersfield area, and I met an 18-year-old who had just gotten accepted to UCLA, and she was saying, that'll be the first time in my life growing up in this Bakersfield area that I will have access to, a bathroom and hooked up to, right? So that's the kind of thing where your mind is blown that is happening in California, the richest state, the richest country on earth. And I really want to turn it over to Victor because, Victor, and your leadership with WELL and your other organizations that you've been a leader in and working with farm working communities. Like the farm working communities have been really actually affected by the drought and water restrictions far more than the coast and the cities, as we've talked about in this call. And I just wanted to just quickly turn it over to you to kind of just talk about those impacts and how we as water activists from perhaps more privileged areas of the state can be water activists for places that are not, and what can we look for to support to make sure that all Californians have that access to clean and safe drinking water and tap water.
Well, David, as Joone mentioned, million residents in California don't have access to clean, affordable, and reliable water as we sit here today. As we bathed this morning or cooked our meals or had our coffee, we take that for granted. And the story you said about the college student is evident that we still have a long ways to go in California in providing for our residents. But specifically, farm worker towns are hit in two specific ways. Number one, when the drought hits and it impacts the industry as it has in the farm working communities throughout California, their livelihoods are at stake. Their ability to make a living for their families is jeopardized. So the lack of water means fewer crops are produced in the farming communities, and obviously that impacts the number of jobs, the number of hours, the number of days farm workers can work. So immediately their livelihood is put on the balance in terms of economic challenges. The second thing that farm workers communities face is the quality of water. The water to irrigate crops is a different quality than water to drink at home. And so the water that's available for families in these farm working communities many times is contaminated. Many times the water that they're drinking, whether it's at home, in their faucets or even at school, the children, these waters have chemicals that are cancer causing, chemicals that are not healthy for families, young children, et cetera. And so that's a second challenge that a lot of these farm working communities face every day. And so while we could look at these communities and say they're being challenged around the agricultural aspect of it, they are, but it also impacts them at home in terms of the safe and clean water that's available.
No, thank you so much for that, Victor. Really appreciate that. And I want to make sure we get some more questions from our audience out there to our panelists. So, and this is for either Joone or Victor. If you have an answer to this one, so Sue is asking, how much has fighting all the fires in California affected the state's water supply? I'm really interested in knowing the answer to that as well, because we've had a lot of fires.
Very much. The wildfires really affect not just air quality, but water quality and the flow of water. So in Calaveras, that's the Sierras, basically the gold country, the God country. And when we experience devastating fires there, what it does is the natural flow of water that is timed and paced by trees and all the stuff so that it could percolate into the groundwater and it can, flow at a way that it times with our usage. When you don't have that, the water basically rushes through and is taking all the ashes and all these other stuff into the water stream. So when that happens, it compromises the water quality. And sometimes the filtering system and the treatment systems are not prepared for that kind of a surge of these kinds of elements. The other part, the forest management is so important for water supply because, the water starts in Sierras, the headwaters, and so how that all flows. And while we understand the impact of climate change, as David said, with, less snowpacks, but when you start having all these other forest issues and wildfires, it can certainly present a great deal of problem for water. And that's why we try to be at the table to say, what can we do? And of course, the fire burns down infrastructure. Again, these are infrastructures that you may not see, but lift stations, pump stations, all these things that make water flow and go can also be devastated by fire. And when there is fire, we as workers cannot get to our assets and our infrastructure. So when you have a line break, when you have something that's caused by fire, when you have, tanks that are burning up, these are all problems that affect us. And so when we look at our solutions, this is why we have to have a very diverse set of solutions that take into account wildfires, earthquakes, and others.
No, thank you so much for that, Joone. Really, really important answer there. We have another question from Tom. This is a good question too. In California, is water allocated by the seniority of the user? I think he was mentioning that in the context of water rights that we've been talking about here. And I know too, looking at the Colorado River and how, certain states have certain rights. I was reading that Arizona farmers are really bearing the brunt of the current restrictions of the Colorado River drought. But yeah, Joone or Victor, could you talk a little bit about seniority and water use?
Sure, I'll take the first crack. Yeah, it is by seniority, it's sort of a first in time kind of a approach to water rights. And there's different types of water rights, but these are all water rights that were established many, many, decades, centuries ago, that really is challenging for us to manage through today, given our today's needs and just how everything has changed and evolved. But yes, water rights are very legal, it's contractual. And depending on which part you're talking about, so groundwater rights or how the groundwater is adjudicated, who has what rights versus the delta, which is by the diverter. So you have area of origin, you have, senior and junior rights holders. And you talk about the Colorado that was negotiated between the 7 basin states that also affects in a country of Mexico, and how at that time, when people weren't as developed, they thought, well, we have this water and we'll just kind of like let you have extra. Well, now everyone's developing, no one's slowing down. And Colorado River, not many people know this, but very from the outset, because back then there wasn't really good data, you can imagine, it was oversubscribed from the beginning. So now we're playing this game of like, okay, we all have to take a pinch, and in 2026, the negotiation is back at the table. So we're going to have to negotiate this all again for the Colorado River, which is also dwindling. When you look at these two systems, they're achieving all kinds of records. The State Water Project is the first time in the state of California since the State Water Project that we've had 0 allocation. but we still pay for that, whether we get a drop or not. Same thing with Colorado, the record low levels, that's really affecting the availability of water and even the operation of some of the power facilities there. So it's not a really good outlook that we have, but again, it's something that we can still manage through.
And Victor, did you have something very quickly to add before we wrap up?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you all so much. It's been a fantastic conversation. I just really want to quickly just give our biggest thanks to Joone and to Victor for joining us for today's call. Really fascinating stuff. I see some hand claps in the Zoom pictures there. Please join me in applauding them virtually. They've been so fantastic, and I've learned several things. And again, thank you so much for joining AARP Climate Chats. These will be, this was recorded, so you'll be able to catch this if you missed some of it on YouTube in a couple days. We'll have that up on our page. And stay tuned. We're going to take a quick October break, but we'll be back with more climate chats in the coming months. And we'll actually have an even more regular schedule next year on a lot of different subjects. There's so much to talk about. But obviously, we're very excited to have started these climate chats with air quality, extreme heat, and now water, as they're just such elemental and foundational subjects for us Californians. So thanks again for joining, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Take care.